Warning, this video contains Motu dismemberment. Viewer discretion is advised. Lala, are you going to do a poo? Hello and welcome back to I Made This. My name is Ollie and today it's my favourite time of the year. It's time for the Big Bot Bash. Oh! I've been looking forward to this all year. Being part of the Big Bot Bash last year, in fact I can't believe it's been a year already, but being part of that last year was amazing. My YouTube channel was tiny. I mean, it still is tiny, but it was even tinier back then. But the fact that Bill asked me to be involved in it meant a lot to me, and I met so many amazing artists and crafters through being part of that collaboration. And thankfully, he asked me to be part of it again for the second year. And being as this is the Big Bot Bash 2, I'm not making just one bot, I'm making two. And if you know anything about the Big Bot Bash, basically you have a Junkbot generator where you have 6 different attributes. You have head, body, hands, arms, legs, and flavour. And each of these has a set of different attributes within them. So you have body, you have number 1, bellyful, 2, missing parts, 3, skewered, 4, should it be leaking, things like that. And then what you do is you roll a 20-sided die. And whatever that lands on, you assign to that attribute. So for example, if I roll a 7, I make a body that's heavy smoker. If I roll a 4 for head, I make a googly head. If I roll a 7 for hands, I do barbed, and so on and so forth. And I kind of work all that into making my robot. So you're up to speed? All right, let's get rolling. So body, 5, brick shithouse. Head, 13, that is broken. So arms, those are 3. Extras, hands, 3 again, that is buzz. Legs, so 9. Centaur, so now flavour. Tell me what's your flavour. 14. Dirty. Right, let's build a bot. So I'm really bad when it comes to sketching. I wish I was one of these people that could just like draw in a sketchbook and kind of formulate my ideas that way. But I tend to kind of start with my ideas fully formulated in my head already, and what comes out of my hand onto the paper is basically the finished idea. And I need to kind of work on my sketching skills and have more room for experimentation in that kind of way. But I'm pretty happy with the design of this robot, and I think it kind of fulfills the attributes that I rolled. So for the body, I rolled brick shithouse, so he's got a massive upper torso. Head is broken. I haven't drawn a broken head here, but eventually when I make the robot, he will have a broken head. Arms, I rolled extras, and he's actually going to have an arm that comes from his back with an extra buzzsaw on it because I rolled buzz for hands, so all the hands are going to have spinning rotor blades on it. For the legs, I rolled Centaur, so he's just going to have 4 of these kind of spindly legs. I'm a big fan of The Legend of Zelda, especially Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild, and I love the Guardians in those, so I kind of want to evoke that. And for style, I rolled Dirty, so I'm just going to grime him up. But yeah, I think he looks pretty cool. I just hope I can pull it off. So, shock horror, I'm not going to use any junk on this bot. I'm going to use clay, Super Sculpey to be precise. And I'm going to use some of these Master of the Universe joints. And going back to last year's Big Bot Bash, where I tried to add articulation and failed
into my robot. I want to kind of go one step further this one and actually make a toy. I'm not a collector of statues, so it's not something I'm really that interested in, but I do love toys and making action figures, and I thought this would be a great opportunity to do something different. So what I've done here is made a rough template of the body of my robot. I'm going to bake this and it will give me a nice solid basis to build the torso and the arms for my robot. And it makes sure that everything keeps within the same size, because I want this to be about 5.5 inches tall. Normally you'd pack this out with tin foil to kind of, one, to save on clay, and also so that it won't crack when it's being baked in the oven. But thankfully, because I've got this great big hole in the middle where the head's going to go, hopefully there'll be enough space for the air to kind of circulate around this robot torso. And I'm doing my best not to do too much detail with this softer clay, because it doesn't really hold detail as much, and when you're kind of moving it around with your hands, it's easy for those details to get lost. And I generally prefer to use a firmer, harder clay for those kind of details, but I always get carried away with myself and I do too much with the softer clay. But so far the body's looking pretty good. So I'm going to bake that front part, and now I'm going to work on the back. So that means that I can handle the front part of the robot without worrying about squishing it. And I'm doing my best to kind of marry up the back with the front. And here I'm cutting out a groove in the back. Because I rolled for extra arms, I'm going to have an arm that comes out of the back of the robot's back. And I'm going to do my best to create my own articulated arm that can come out of the back of the robot and come forward and over the front of the robot. I don't think I'm making much sense, but you'll get the idea in a minute. And as you can see, it's kind of like a little backpack that can rise over the back of the robot and over the front. And while this firm clay is sometimes a bit harder to use than the softer clay, it holds details a lot better, and I also find it's less likely to burn in the oven. And again, adding more details to the front of this robot. And again, it's a fine line with the detail on this robot. Because it's a toy, I don't want it to be overly detailed, but at the same time I don't want it to be not detailed, if that makes sense. I want a nice balance. It's more about the silhouette for this robot for me. Okay, so now we're sculpting the upper arms, or the shoulders, or what do they call them, pauldrons or something like that, like those just big shoulders. And again, I'm using the template that I made from the Super Sculpting, and I'm just building it out with the softer clay before covering it with the firmer clay, in which I'll then build up the detail on top of. And I just start to take away some detail, so leave some exposed parts and then build up some parts on top of it. So this shoulder has dimension to it. It's got lots of shapes and lots of things going on. I mean, I have no idea what any of these things mean or do. They're just aesthetically pleasing, I guess. And I just add loads of dots and doodads and rivets and things like that just to make it look interesting. Looking at them, they kind of look like the face of those blobby fishes, if you know what I mean. So now I'm making the forearm, which will house the rotor blade, and I'm basically going to do 2 parts for each arm that will then sandwich the blade in between, if that makes sense. Cutting out these blades was very difficult. I mean, they're not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but as you can see, this is kind of the shape I'm going for with the rotor blade and the forearm. And then, much like the shoulders, I add a big chunk of Sculpey on top of the already baked Sculpey, and I start to carve away detail to make it nice and 3-dimensional. And because I've got fat fingers, I keep ruining it and have to keep refining it. And there we go, just adding some more detail onto that arm. And then these are the 2 parts that will house the blade and sandwich together. And then this is kind of like the bicep area, which will have the elbow joint. And this is how they'll be put together. And now I'm just refining the extra arm that I have to make that comes out of his back, and just putting some extra detail. And again, I thought it'd be fun to have an extra blade that comes from the top, so there's like 3 blades, like a trifecta of blades that can kind of create like a meat grinder. So now I'm making the centaur legs, and I mean, a centaur should mean horse like, I guess, so it should mean there's a bit of a back to it, but I'm not really doing that. I'm just doing like a middle section that 4 legs sprout from. And I'm a big fan of The Legend of Zelda, and I love the Guardians in the latest, like Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. And so I kind of wanted to kind of emulate that with this bot and have these kind of just kind of tendril legs. I guess a little bit like the Matrix as well, those robots in the Matrix. And yeah, just something a bit different, I guess, as well. That's makes it a little bit more organic. And I like the idea that this robot will be able to climb up the sides of things and kind of wrap itself around things as it's like using its blades to cut things off. So like the shoulders and the forearms, I covered the baked Sculpey in more Sculpey and then carve on top of that. And I do that because the baked Sculpey gives it a bit of stability as I'm sculpting on top of it. And then I'll wash over it with a bit of isopropyl alcohol just to kind of smooth it out a bit. And I'm just adding some rivets to this bot because you've got to have rivets on a robot, haven't you? So unfortunately my card corrupted when I was sculpting this head. But this little gemstone, I'm actually going to sandwich these into the torso at the top and the bottom, and then slide the head in, and then hopefully it will mean that the head can move side to side. And here are all the 27 parts that I have sculpted, which I then have to mould and cast. So this is your trigger warning. I'm going to cut up some of these Master of the Universe figures for their ball joints and sockets. So yeah, you have been warned. But considering these figures are over 40 years old, they still work perfectly as a basis for articulation. You've got the bigger joints from like the He-Man type figures, and then you've got the smaller ones from like the Moduloc figure. I mean, they look like little nipples, don't they? Woo, woo, woo. I use some super glue and baking soda just to firm up the joints to make them nice and solid. And then I start to break off the plastic around the side of them. Why I didn't use my little nippers, I don't know why. I'm an idiot. And then I sand them down nice and flat so that when I glue them onto the body parts, they'll just be nice and flush. And now I'm going to chop off this shoulder of one of these He-Man figures. And the same with these Moduloc limbs. Hiya! And now just marking out where I'm going to put my articulation. And where I'm going to drill in holes for the sockets. Sculpey's fairly easy to drill into, it's not really much of a problem. The only problem is you can go too far with them, so you've just got to be very careful with that. As you can see, I drilled a bit too far on these ones and went through to the other side. Whoops! And then I get the milli put out again, which is a 50-50 2-part epoxy, which you then mix together. I start to wedge in those ball and socket joints into the limbs, basically. And then to make it even more secure, I use some super glue and baking soda. And again, repeat the process for all the limbs. And I sand it down, but as you can see, it's not super flush. So I get the milliput out again and just fill in those holes. Look at that, nice and neat. And now I'm just drilling some holes in the blades so that they'll be able to rotate within the arms. And I've just sanded down the head so it fits nicely into the torso.
Hello, Editor Ollie here. Right about now you should be seeing footage of me gluing on the ball joints to the torso and the forearms and working on the articulation for the spinning blades. Unfortunately, the card that footage was on has been corrupted somehow, so it's all been lost. So you're just going to have to imagine it. Sorry about that.
And now it's time to prime this mother. Yeah, I'm not very good at doing this. I'm always way too close to the items and I end up getting them all nice and globby, and I end up having to sand them down again and re-prime them because I rush everything because I'm just very eager. So now this is probably the most tedious part of the build, especially for me. I hate making molds. It's really a pain in the ass, but if you want to make a toy, you have to make molds, unfortunately. And I make molds in two different methods. I either use foam board boxes, which I'm making here for these legs, or I use Lego boxes. But these legs will be a one-part mold, and the cocktail sticks that I'm using are a way of creating an air vent so that when I pour the resin in, there's a place for the air bubbles to escape, and so that hopefully I won't get no air bubbles in the leg once it's cast. And then I seal up the box ready for the silicone to be poured inside of it. And again, same with these feet, it's just a one-piece mold that I'll be able to just pour the silicone on top of and then just pour resin in and just pop the legs out. Now for the torso, I'm actually going to create this as a two-part mold, and I do that by creating a box out of Lego and then lining it with plasticine, or you can use clay. Probably clay might be better. But then you bury half of the torso in the plasticine, and now I'm just creating some indentations and some markings and using some beads to kind of create a locking mechanism for when it's a two-part mold so that it kind of fits together nice and flush. And here are all the molds that I've created for this robot so far, ready for silicone to be poured inside of it. So for the silicone, basically you pour as much silicone as you want, or you can fill it into a cup, and then you put 10% of a setting agent inside of it and you mix it all together. And then once it's all mixed up, you place it inside a vacuum chamber, and what you're doing is you're degassing the silicone. You're taking out all the air that you've put into it as you've been mixing the setting agent and the silicone together. And this then means that once you pour it inside your molds, you will have a perfect mold once it's all set and ready for the resin to be poured inside of it. And that's what I'm doing now, just pouring it inside those molds. And then after 24 hours, once it's all set, you can then take apart the casings from the mold. And I absolutely hate this part, it takes forever. And especially on a two-part mold like this where you're taking off all the plasticine, because it leaves a residue which you then have to clean off with isopropyl alcohol, but you also have to then be careful not to damage the part inside. Then you build the Lego box up again, and then using this release agent you spray it all onto the model, and what it does is it basically creates like a wax layer on top of it so that when you pour your silicone on top of it, the silicone doesn't attach to itself, which is what it will do, and then you won't be able to get your parts out without hacking away at it. And basically by using the wax it kind of creates a very thin layer so that the silicone doesn't stick together. And here they are, ready for their second pour. Oh god, it's so tedious. And if you can, always pour in the corners and kind of let the silicone find its way around the part. And here I am just injecting some silicone inside of one of the articulation points because I want to make sure it all gets in there. And again, just prodding it in there to make sure that it all gets in there. And again, just waiting for that to dry another 24 hours before I can take it apart and see if these molds have actually worked. So yeah, fingers crossed this all works out well, because I really don't want to recast any of these things again. But yeah, so far so good. So the thing with these molds, they don't last forever. You've probably got a good 10 to 20 casts out of them if you're lucky, maybe more if you look after them well. Now this torso is the one that I'm mostly worried about, but it seems like it's moulded pretty well, so hopefully we'll get a good cast out of that. So this is the fun part. This is where we see if all our hard work pays off, and this is where we're going to cast everything in resin. And the resin I'm using here is a more harder resin than you'd probably use for an action figure. But the reason why I'm doing that is because, one, it pours really well, and it has a nicer finish for painting, I think. And one of the reasons why I want something to pour well is because I'm not going to be using my pressure pot. I just haven't got the time to do that. To do that, I would probably still be casting today. But thankfully, the molds were good enough that I'm getting very minimal air bubbles. And any air bubbles that I am getting, I can probably just fill in with a bit of milliput. But look, my articulation is working, and Master of the Universe fans will be happy to know that I've casted a bunch of joints so that I can use them on my future builds without having to break up any more action figures, essentially. And I have a feeling I can probably use these in what I'm making now. I can actually pop them inside of the molds because I'm casting these in a softer resin, and that means that when I put two joints together with the softer resin, they'll fit together, because if I tried to make it with the hard resin, they wouldn't slot in together. But by combining the two different resins together, I'm getting the best of both worlds. I'm getting the articulation from the soft resin, but I'm kind of getting the finish from a harder resin. And it's a nice compromise and happy medium that I'm going for. And it seems to be paying off, but whether or not it fully works remains to be seen. Now, I'm not sure if using a syringe to get all the resin inside of a mold is the most ideal method, but it seems to work for me. And then, as you can see, there's the softer ball joint with the harder resin forearm. And in this shoulder joint, I've got a few air bubbles, but again, it's nothing that a bit of milliput won't fix. I mean, the outside of it looks perfectly fine, so for aesthetic reasons, it's going to look okay. But yeah, I'm really pleased with how that torso's turned out, and yeah, I'm thrilled with that. This one got a few air bubbles at the top, but again, it's nothing that a bit of milliput won't fix. Using those softer ball joints with the harder resin works an absolute charm. I'm thrilled to bits with that, and I'm considering that a success. I have no idea if I've stolen that method from someone else. If I have, I apologise. But now I'm casting the buzzsaws, so I'm hoping these turn out pretty well. There's a good chance these could have shifted in the mould, so I don't know. So I've got my fingers crossed. So far, so good. Going to give them a little bit of a trim. But aside from a few air bubbles on one side, they look pretty good. And again, I can just fill those in with milliput. And again, the forearms have turned out pretty well, as have some of these joints. Now, while I used the harder resin for the majority of the body, except for the articulation, I thought for the back arm, I'm best to use the softer resin. And that's because it has to kind of wedge into the back of the robot. And I thought it's probably better if it's a softer, gummier resin that can have a little bit more give. So it should be easier to slot into its back. And also so that it can sandwich in between this articulation point here, which is probably a little bit big, so I'm going to have to fettle it down just a little bit and give it a little bit of a sand because it's a little bit too wide. But once I've done that, it fits perfectly, and hopefully it should work. Yeah, look at that. Bad boy! Oh, I'm so happy with that. And again, it doesn't quite fit, so I'm just going to have to fettle away a little bit on the top of that joint. I'm just going to have to fettle away that joint so it'll fit in the back. But yeah, after a little bit of jiggery pokery, it works. I am super thrilled with that. If I was to make this again, it's just something I could refine, but for a first pass, it's pretty good. I'm pretty chuffed with that. And then finally, just checking out this waist section. Again, a tiny air bubble, but nothing a bit of milliput can't fix. I wish my workspace looked this clean when I was working, but it doesn't. This isn't a complete and utter lie. But I always have a few extra molds of other items that I've made lying around, so that if I've got some extra resin, I can... And here are all my casted parts, and considering I didn't use my pressure pot, I got very few air bubbles and they were easily fixed, and yeah, I'm super thrilled with how this is turning out so far. So now it's time to paint all these parts, and painting, as I've said many times before, is not my favourite part of the process. I'm not that good at it, or more so I'm just a little bit more impatient with it. I think that's what it comes down to. But seeing as this is a toy, I'm just keeping it very simple. I decided on a very bright red. Even though my sketch was blue, I thought red would be a lot more bold and a bit more fun, basically. And yeah, I'm just painting on the detail, essentially. I'm not painting any additional detail that's not already in the sculpt. I'm kind of keeping it fairly toyetic in that respect. Yeah, I'm just touching up some areas where my stupid fat fingers have gone outside the lines there. But yeah, I should probably tell you a little bit about this robot. I see this as like a scavenger bot that is kind of sent out basically to kind of excavate broken robots or ships or vessels, things like that. Basically, these giant saws that it has for hands is able to cut through metal and is able to excavate all these materials for pirates and whatnot. And yeah, that's basically what it is. He's a scavenger bot. Here I am just starting to assemble the bot together and gluing those feet together. It looks a little bit like Mickey Mouse there. I don't know why. Is it because he's got like little red pants on or something like that and black legs? Maybe I should have painted his feet yellow. And now I'm starting to texture it up, weather it up a little bit. Kind of making it a little bit dirty, but not kind of overdoing it, to be honest. You know, you can kind of go a bit over the top with these things, and it's always hard to know when to stop. So I'm not going too far with this. Now I'm just dry brushing some silver onto the legs, just kind of highlighting some of the detail that's there, and adding a little bit of a contrasting green onto the little screens on his body, and adding a wash to these blades, and with that, he is done. So now it's time to assemble this bot together and see if all of our hard work is actually going to pay off and that it's actually going to work as an action figure. So far, everything seems to be gluing in place pretty well and lining up, so I'm pretty chuffed about that. There's a few little gaps here and there, so it's not entirely perfect, but for a toy that I have made within the space of 2 weeks from start to finish, I think it's coming together as well as it possibly could. And it's a bit of a worry putting these things together, because as you're adding paint onto it, you're adding mass onto things, so you're just hoping that it fits together like it should do, like it originally did when I first casted these parts. And so far, they all seem to be popping in together pretty well. And to be honest, the extra paint may give it a little bit of extra grip, you never know. And now it's time to assemble the entire bot. And the torso fits onto those legs pretty well, as do the shoulders. And the forearms take a little bit of a wiggle, but they get on there eventually. The back arm just clips in nicely in place, and then the head just slots in perfectly. You know what, guys, I very rarely praise my own work, but I'm pretty pleased with how this has all come together, I'm not gonna lie. And with the final finishing touches of some wires going from the arms, I think it's time for the glamour shots. Right, now he's assembled. Let's see if all this articulation actually works as it's intended to. Yeah, the waist works, the shoulders, the forearms, the blade swivel. Yeah, look at it. I'm just so thrilled with how this has turned out. The head moves like it's supposed to. Oh, also, I was supposed to make a broken head, so I did kind of cast another head and kind of broke the eye a little bit. So there's your broken head. And let's see if the back arm moves and kind of holds in place. And thankfully it does. It's kind of tight enough, and it also rotates there, and the wheel spins as well. I can't believe that I made a fully articulated action figure in 2 weeks, from the conception, design, to the sculpting, to the mold making and the casting. I set out to do what I tried to do last year, where I tried to make an articulated figure, but I just did it properly by casting it all and making all the joints and articulation points part of the mold. It just makes it much more substantial, and so that the articulation actually works. And the best thing about making a mold is that you can make multiple versions of it. So here's a blue one, like my sketch, and here's a yellow one that I kind of modelled after the colours of the power loader in Aliens. And it just means that there's no end to the possibilities. I can kind of create different arms for these guys, so that the bots have a different function and things like that. They could have a gun arm or just normal hands, things like that. There's no end to the possibilities of these. They're quite modular in that respect. Kind of like, are these perfect? No, not at all. Obviously I've got some air bubbles in from my casting, and I could probably spend more time on the sculpt, refining those, so making sure that all the edges are all nice and neat. And obviously painting is not my forte, so it's not that great at the end of the day. Putting on some green gels and that kind of masks that a little bit. But yeah, guys, I am super thrilled with how this has turned out.
So yeah, I'm super thrilled with how this turned out. Looking back at last year's robot, I was a little bit down on that and I wasn't too sure about it. But this guy, yeah, I'm pretty happy with him. I think he's pretty cool. Could he be better? Yeah, of course he could, but you can say that about anything, can't you? But considering I made this within 2 weeks in all the processes, I think, you know, it's not too bad. And this is the part of the video where I should be telling you about all the people who are part of the collaborations, showing some fun clips, asking you to subscribe to my YouTube channel, to like the video, all that good stuff. But I'm not going to do that just yet. And that's because if you've seen the title of this video, you know that I've built another robot. And the reason for that is kind of out of spite, believe it or not. Going back to last year's Big Bot Bash, I got so many wonderful comments from people on YouTube. Because obviously, as I said, I was a bit down on my bot, and people saying, you know, it's pretty good actually, or giving me painting advice and things like that. It was really wonderful. But I also got a few comments from people going, oh, you didn't build a Junkbot, or oh, you cheated. And in all fairness, you know, I did kind of tailor this challenge to my own specific skill sets, like sculpting and making toys and things like that. But the more I thought about it, the more I feel like I should make a Junkbot. It's kind of like going to an Indian restaurant and ordering fish and chips. You know, you're going there, but not having the experience that's, you know, it's intended to have, you know. So I thought, I really should make a Junkbot. I've got a lot of crap lying around here, so why not? So while I was priming this and waiting for it to dry and waiting for molds to cure, I made a Junkbot. So without further ado, let's see what I rolled. So body. So 1. Belly full. Head. 2. That is 3 times 3 eyes. Does that mean 3 eyes or 9 eyes? Arms, that's an 8. That is knuckle draggers. Hands, it's 10. That is big gun or big gun? Big hands or a big gun? I don't know. I'll figure it out. Legs, it's 19. Triple jointed. And style, that's a 1, and that is rusty. Right, let's make another bot.
So for the base of my Junkbot, I'm going to use these 2 Poundland knockoff Nerf guns. I've actually got 2 of each of these, and the reason being is that on the surface they look like a gun, but inside of them is like a treasure trove of greeblies and interesting shapes that will work wonders for a Junkbot. So amongst all these parts, there's definitely an arm and a leg or a body that I can create that can be like the basis for my robot. Even household items like this spray bottle lid are just a wealth of parts and greeblies. Like for example, that could be like a cog or a motor. This could be a gun barrel or the tip of a booster or a rocket. This, don't know what this could be, but it's interesting nonetheless. This could be a foot or something. And this tube could be a tube. So I really have no plan with this build. I'm just kind of feeling it out and just going with the flow. And I have a feeling that these two gun barrels will make an interesting shape for the body when glued together. And I'm not being super careful when I'm gluing it together. Because I rolled rusty, I think that will add to it. You know, if the robot itself is just covered in crap, then I can use that to my advantage. So I'm drilling some holes so that I can feed some armature wire through it. And the reason for this is that I want this to be a really stable robot. And I think by doing this, I can actually slide on all my parts and then eventually glue them all together, and it should be nice and sturdy when it's finished. And these handles that I'm kind of hacking away at, I think could be used as the upper arms perhaps, maybe. And the ball from this roller deodorant could possibly be used as an elbow. Just threading through a bead there as some sort of shoulder. And look at that, the handle fits in perfectly as the upper arm. But yeah, I'm cutting up the handle of the other gun, and once put together, I think they make the basis of a foot. And so I'm starting to cobble together the 3-jointed foot there. And the trigger from the spray bottle works perfectly as a foot. But I want to double it up and make it kind of like proper pigeon-toed. So I glue 2 together, and again I'm just caking on that super glue and baking powder. I then attach the handle to the foot, and yeah, it's starting to come together. And look at that, the trigger from one of the guns makes for a perfect, like, I don't know, piston or something like that. I don't know, it looks cool anyway. And I put the spray bottle back together, kind of, and it all just started to slot together. It was like it was meant to be. And if you look, it kind of slots perfectly onto the armature wire there. So I'm just cutting off this detail, which I think can be used later on. But I'm putting back together the barrel of the gun, because I feel like this might make for a pretty cool forearm. These little plastic Easter eggs are always handy to have around, and I think this is going to make a great basis for my hand. I'm just going to hot glue it in there so it's nice and secure, and using beads I'm going to thread them onto some wire and create some fingers. As I said before, I had no plan with making this robot, I'm just kind of making it up as I go along, but every detail that I add to it is kind of adding to the character and the story that's kind of coming up in my head as I'm building it. It's really quite exciting, I'm really enjoying this process. So this cable reel, the outside edge is actually the perfect size for the palm of my hand that I made out of the egg, and it just fits in perfectly. It was like it was meant to be. So instead of trying to glue the legs together with just super glue and the baking powder method, I'm actually going to wrap it all in EVA foam, because for some reason EVA foam sticks really well to plastic, and then EVA foam sticks really well to EVA foam. So I think by doing this it will just save me a lot of time and effort. And this is crazy because I had no plan of how this robot was going to look, but he's starting to look like something, and I'm really, really pleased with how it's coming together. This trigger I thought would make great for like some sort of cod piece, and now I'm just gluing on some more greeblies on the leg to make it look like some sort of articulation point. I thought these screw lids would work really well at the top of the legs just to kind of fill in all those gaps. And because I rolled belly full, I thought this disc firing toy that I found in Poundland would work really well as kind of like the belly. And look, it opens up, I can hide like my drugs or something in there. I don't do drugs, don't worry. So now that the silhouette of the bot is kind of taking shape, I'm now going to fill it out with lots of interesting details and greeblies. And because I rolled 3x3 eyes, I thought this would be a great basis for eyes, and I just glued in some beads there. And when I made one of the Psychedelic Porn Crumpets videos, I bought a load of Buzz Lightyear toys, and this is just from like one of the capsules or something. But as you can see, it houses those eyes perfectly. These baby food lids are so handy, and they make for great like little turbines. And then using those plastic Easter eggs, I'm going to cut them in half and glue them onto the side around the baby food lid. And it just kind of creates this cool little turbine on the side of the body. And again, just caking on that glue and baking powder. I know it doesn't look very neat at the moment, but trust me, it'll work out in the end. I hope. And these shapes were from the inside of the barrel of one of the Nerf guns, and they just kind of fit perfectly as some sort of exhaust on top of the robot. This test tube here will make for a great canister that can be housed on the back of the robot, which I could probably fill with slime or something like that. You know me, if you've seen in my music videos, I have slime everywhere, so I've got to have slime in one of my Junkbots somewhere. This is a leg from one of those bendy tripods, and I thought it'd make for a great tube that can go from the canister to the back of the robot. I also thought it'd be fun to make him a weapon or some sort of walking stick or aid using a super glue nozzle, syringes, cocktail sticks. These little parts were from like a mini lamp that I found in Poundland. This propeller is actually from the AMP challenge that I did for Slimehouse TV several years ago, and I thought it'd be fun to carry over some details from the body, like maybe these are from parts of a fallen robot and he's made a weapon using them, so they're still carrying on the fight. And again, it's just made from the lid of the baby food container and the plastic Easter egg, and just adorned it with some more details from the mini lamps, some rivets, some EVA foam. And it all slots together so I can get it in his hand. And now I'm just securing his pose, and I have just discovered Superglue Activator, and this stuff has changed my life. It's amazing. You have to be careful with it because it can gunk up, but again, he's a rusty robot, so it's going to add to it. But look, he's super firm now, he's not going to go anywhere. And as you can see, I've gone to town with the detail now, but I kind of got a bit carried away and forgot I had to film it, and I just started to build it for fun. And I'm just showing you the aftermath of me vomiting greeblies all over this piece. I've put them on the toes, on the knuckles, everywhere. I mean, I don't know what these things do or anything like that at the moment, but they look pretty cool, I think. And hopefully once it's all painted up, it'll kind of all start to come together. But yeah, I'm really pleased with the details of the legs and the pistons and all these kinds of things. And I've used some more EVA foam here to hide some seams and make it more secure. So I've kept it that this can stay open, so if you've got any ideas of what I can put in there, sound it off in the comments below. This hairband was a last minute addition, but it just kind of filled out the space and made it look a little bit less empty. But I'm super pleased with how these turbines turned out. But as a crafter, there's nothing more satisfying than putting two pieces together that were never meant to be, and they kind of create a whole. And I'm just going to tie this canister onto his back, because if you use super glue on clear plastic, it just looks terrible. So let's have a look at a few turnarounds of the robot in the state that he is in now. Because I love these colours. It's kind of like a test. It's kind of like an action figure test shot when they first come out of the factory, and all the body parts are in different colours. It's so bright and vibrant and colourful, and I kind of wish I had enough parts to build multiple versions of this robot so you can see all the different stages of him, from the unpainted to primed and then to the final piece. But thankfully we have this video to kind of look back on what he looked like before I primed him. And speaking of priming, let's go. I'm not very good at spray painting. As you can see, I'm way too close to it, but it was a very windy day, and if I didn't get close enough to him, no paint would be attached to this robot whatsoever. But I think he looks pretty decent, actually. But it's crazy how the primer kind of unifies the robot and evolves it from what it was before, and now it's starting to become its own entity. It's no longer the barrel of a toy gun or the trigger from a spray bottle. It's now starting to become the bot that it was destined to be all along. And I was talking earlier about how my bot from last year, I just felt the colour was really lacking in it. It was just white, grey and black essentially, with a few orange highlights. So with these robots, I really wanted to ramp the colour and just do something really bright and vibrant. And teal is one of my favourite colours, so I thought, yeah, let's have a teal robot, why not? And then I sprayed a neon yellow from the top to kind of give it a highlight, so that when you look at it from different angles, he kind of looks like a different colour. So from underneath he looks more teal blue, but from higher up he looks more yellowy green. Now, I'm not going to lie, but I'm really nervous about painting this. As I've said before many times, painting is not my forte. I'm not very good at it. And there's just so much going on in this robot. I have no idea where I'm going to start. So what is it Bill always says? Painting time with Bill is boring time with Bill, or whatever. So taking a page out of his book, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the lore of this robot that I've kind of created as I've been making him. Now, if you know anything about me and the work that I do, I make claymation music videos specifically for a band called the Psychedelic Prawn Crumpets, and over the last couple of years we've been developing like a universe centering around this character called T-Bone McLaserblast, and I think this character would be ripe to fit into that world. Now, I haven't fully fleshed out this idea, so just bear with me. So this guy is huge. I'm talking skyscraper size. He is massive. And originally he wasn't the only one. There were thousands of these robots across the land, and they were created to clean up this planet because the planet he's from has been destroyed. The planet is surrounded by a toxic cloud. The water is all polluted. And this guy and all the other robots were created to essentially clean up the planet, ready for its inhabitants to come back again at a future date. But the problem being is that these robots are made from very precious and rare minerals and materials that are really sought after across the galaxy. And scavengers have been travelling to this planet for years to basically destroy these robots and strip them and mine them for parts. And this guy is one of, if not the last of his kind. He is essentially an endangered species. And as I spoke about earlier, the main character in my music videos is a guy called T-Bone McLaserblast. He's kind of like a rogue scoundrel bounty hunter kind of guy, but he's skilled at taking down giant monsters and aliens. And I like the idea that he's used these robots as practice in the past, and obviously probably sold some of their parts and things like that. But being as this is the last robot, he has somehow grown a bit of a conscience, and for whatever reason has decided not to take this robot down, and they've kind of formed like an alliance. Think a bit like that film Dragonheart with Sean Connery. I am the last one! But yeah, I haven't really thought about it any much further than that, but that's kind of the vibes I'm going for. So maybe you'll see this Titan in a future music video, who knows. Right, I think I've done enough now. It's time for the glamour shots. I am absolutely over the moon with how this has turned out. Seeing as I'd never scratch built anything before and this is the result, I am really pleased. Could it be better? Yeah, sure, but as I said, for a first time, I think he looks pretty good, to be honest. He's definitely channeling some Big Daddy vibes from BioShock meets the Titans from Titanfall, and he's also kind of got a bit of a ethereal, majestical kind of quality to him, like he's kind of part of the earth, which is also something I was going for. A little bit Ghibli-esque, maybe, I don't know. But I'm really thrilled with how he turned out, especially the paint job. Like I said before, I'm not a painter in the slightest, but I think the paint turned out pretty well, and I think that's just come from watching Bill and Dan's and all these other amazing crafters channels over the years. It's kind of seeped into me, especially like using Bill's method for creating rust. His crusted recipe is so much fun to make and slap over the robot, which I then kind of highlighted with a bit of shoe polish just to kind of make it less one-dimensional in like certain areas. And the one thing I loved about making this, it felt like a jigsaw puzzle where it can go together in any number of ways, but ultimately it can only go together in one way, and that's the way that you're seeing right now. But by making this, I feel like I've unlocked a new power. I think people have called it scrap vision or something like that, where I'll go to Poundland or B&M now and all I'll see is shapes and think, oh, that's a good arm, that's a good joint, that's a good cog, or whatever it is. I feel like I've leveled up as a crafter. I'm genuinely surprised with how much I enjoyed this process, because I'm a person who likes to sketch out my designs first and then follow it through step by step, whereas this was just a stream of consciousness from my head to my hands, and while still trying to fulfill the brief And I think I managed to do that. I mean, he's covered in rust. He's got triple jointed legs. He's got big hands. He's got long knuckled dragging arms. He's got 3 eyes. And he's kind of got a big belly. And regardless of whether or not he totally fulfills that brief, I had an absolute blast making this. And I'm definitely going to do it again.
So yeah, I think it was a pretty successful Big Bot Bash. I'm really pleased with how both of these turned out, especially this guy. I think he's going to be like a little showpiece on my shelf of all my other things I've made. I'm really pleased with this. I don't really have like a big statue or anything like that I've made. They're all little things, and I think this is going to be a little standout. I'm really pleased with him. And I learned so much doing this, and I really enjoyed it. I didn't think I'd enjoy scratch building, but I took to it like a duck to water. Now, I'm not saying I'm the best at it, but I just really enjoyed it, and I can kind of see why people are kind of addicted to it and really get into it, because the limits are endless with it. I absolutely adored it. And of course, this is a collaboration, and it wouldn't be possible if it wasn't for Bill making stuff. So big thanks to Bill, and please check out all the other amazing artists who are taking part in this challenge. So obviously you have Bill making stuff, Dan Does, Theo Kane from Slimehouse TV, Mel's Mini Loft, Tales from the Art Side, 52 Miniatures, The Tired Craftsman, Boyle Hobby Time, Cult of Crafting, Greg Johnson Making, and Cut Transform Glue, just to name a few. So as you can see, there is a wealth of talent involved in this collaboration, and they've all done amazing work, both on their bots and their videos, and they all deserve your admiration. And speaking of admiration, if you don't subscribe to my channel already and you're considering doing so, please hit that subscribe button. I'd really appreciate it. Hopefully there is a Big Bot Bash next year and I'm going to be part of it, but who knows. But if you'd like to reach out to me, I'm on Instagram and Facebook. Just search for I Made This. And until next time, take care and goodbye.